The whispers followed Ruth Taylor like a shadow across the dusty streets of Glenrio, New Mexico Territory. It was 1875, and in this unforgiving frontier town, a woman's worth was often measured by the children she could bear, and Ruth had none to show for her 25 years of life or her brief, tragic marriage. "There she goes again," came the hushed voice from the general store porch as Ruth walked past with her basket of mending. "Poor Thomas Taylor, God rest his soul, never did get his son." Ruth clutched her basket tighter, keeping her eyes forward, her back straight as a ramrod. 3 years, a widow, 5 years married before that, and not a single child to show for it. The doctors back east had confirmed what she already suspected: she would never bear children. That knowledge had followed her west when she came with Thomas, hoping for a fresh start in the territory. The bell above Mr. Donovan's dry goods store jingled as Ruth pushed open the door. Inside, Mrs. Peterson and her 2 daughters fell silent mid-conversation, offering tight smiles that never reached their eyes. "Good morning," Ruth said, her voice betraying none of the hurt that had become as familiar as the ache in her chest. "Ruth," Mrs. Peterson acknowledged with a curt nod. "Girls, we should be on our way." She ushered her daughters toward the door, their whispers barely contained until they reached the street. Mr. Donovan emerged from behind a stack of flour barrels, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile, one of the few Ruth still received in Glenrio. "Miss Ruth, right on time. I've got those buttons you ordered." He shuffled behind the counter, retrieving a small paper package. "Fine quality, just came in on yesterday's stage." "Thank you, Mr. Donovan." Ruth placed a few coins on the counter. "How's the mending business?" he asked, the kindness in his voice making her throat tighten. "Steady enough," she replied. It was true, her needlework skills were exceptional, and even those who shunned her socially still brought their torn shirts and frayed hems to her small house at the edge of town. It was work that kept her fed and her roof patched, if not work that filled the emptiness of her days. As Ruth turned to leave, the store door swung open with force, admitting a tall man with 2 small children. Ruth froze, immediately recognizing Samuel Owens, who had arrived in Glenrio 2 months earlier. He wasn't easy to forget, broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a reputation as a skilled horse trainer. The children, 2 identical boys with copper hair and freckled faces, couldn't have been more than 4 years old. "Mr. Donovan," Samuel nodded in greeting, his voice deep and tinged with a slight southern drawl. "Need some provisions. Boys here outgrow their clothes faster than weeds after rain." The twins clung to their father's legs, eyeing the candy jars on the counter with unconcealed longing. Mr. Donovan chuckled. "Growing boys need plenty, that's the truth. What can I get you, Mr. Owens?" Ruth moved to the side, intending to slip past them unnoticed, when one of the twins broke free from his father and collided with her skirts. "Sorry, madam," the child said, looking up with wide green eyes. "It's quite all right," Ruth replied, bending slightly to meet his gaze. "No harm done." Samuel Owens turned, noticing her for the first time. "Apologize properly, Timothy," he instructed. The boy removed his small cap. "I apologize for bumping into you, madam." Ruth couldn't help her smile. "You're very well-mannered, young man." "Thank you," the boy replied seriously before returning to his father's side. Samuel tipped his hat to her. "Miss Taylor, isn't it? Samuel Owens." His eyes were direct, without the usual judgment she encountered. "Yes, Ruth Taylor," she responded, surprised he knew her name. "My boys and I just moved into the old McCreary place outside town," he explained. "I've heard you're the person to see about mending." Ruth nodded. "I am. Good to know." His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary before he turned back to Mr. Donovan. "We'll need 2 sets of clothes for each boy, some basic supplies, and—" He hesitated, glancing at the twins. "Perhaps a small piece of candy for good behavior." The second twin, who must have been Thomas, tugged at his father's sleeve. "Papa, I was good too." Samuel's weather-lined face softened as he looked down at his sons. "Yes, you were, Thomas. 2 pieces, Mr. Donovan." Ruth found herself watching the interaction with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. She had seen fathers with their children before, of course, but there was something about Samuel Owens' gentle authority and obvious devotion that struck her. He had no wife with him. The town gossips had already established that much, and raising twin boys alone on the frontier couldn't be easy. As Ruth stepped toward the door, Samuel spoke again. "Miss Taylor, if you have time in your schedule, I have some shirts that could use attention. Boys are hard on clothes." "I have time," she replied. "You can bring them by my house, the small white one with blue shutters at the east end of town, anytime that's convenient." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Much obliged." As Ruth left the store, she felt eyes on her back, but was surprised to realize they weren't accompanied by whispers this time. The warmth of the interaction lingered as she walked home, her steps lighter than they had been in months. 2 days later, a knock at Ruth's door interrupted her afternoon work. She set aside the dress she was hemming and smoothed her apron before answering. Samuel Owens stood on her porch, hat in hand, a bundle wrapped in brown paper tucked under his arm. Behind him, the twins peered curiously around his legs. "Mr. Owens," Ruth greeted, opening the door wider. "Please come in." "Thank you, Miss Taylor." He ushered the boys ahead of him into her small front room. "Timothy, Thomas, remember your manners." The twins stood side by side, nearly identical except for a small scar above Thomas's eyebrow. "Good afternoon, Miss Taylor," they recited in unison. "Good afternoon," Ruth replied, unable to suppress a smile. "Would you like some lemonade? I just made some fresh." "That's kind of you," Samuel said. "If it's no trouble." "None at all." Ruth gestured to her small sitting area. "Please make yourselves comfortable." As she poured lemonade in the kitchen, she could hear Samuel quietly instructing the boys not to touch anything. Her home was modest but meticulously kept, with simple furnishings and a few touches that spoke of her Eastern upbringing: a painted china vase, embroidered cushions, a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. When she returned with the tray, Timothy was examining a small wooden music box on her side table. "That was my mother's," Ruth explained, setting down the lemonade. "Would you like to hear it play?" Timothy nodded eagerly. Ruth wound the key and opened the lid, releasing a delicate melody into the room. Both boys watched, transfixed, as the tiny dancer inside spun slowly. "It's pretty," Thomas whispered. "My father gave it to my mother when they were courting," Ruth explained, offering glasses of lemonade to Samuel and the boys. "She taught me to dance to this tune when I was about your age." Samuel accepted his glass with a nod of thanks. "The boys haven't had much exposure to such things," he said quietly. "Their mother, she passed when they were just turning 2. Ruth's eyes softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm very sorry." "Sarah was a good woman," Samuel continued, watching his sons. "Fever took her quick. We were living in Colorado then." "And you've been raising them alone since?" He nodded. "Moved around some following work. I train horses, was with the cavalry during the war, developed a knack for it. Glenrio seemed a good place to settle. Town's growing, needs good stock." Ruth sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. "It can be a good town," she said carefully. Something in her tone made Samuel look at her more closely. "But small towns have long memories and strong opinions," she replied diplomatically. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. I've noticed some folks give you a wide berth, Miss Taylor. Any particular reason? Ruth felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't accustomed to such directness. I'm sure you've heard the gossip by now, Mr. Owens. Can't say that I have. Been too busy getting our place in order and tending to my horses. He took a sip of lemonade. But small towns being what they are, I imagine it has something to do with you being a widow without family nearby. That's part of it, she acknowledged, watching as the twins cautiously sipped their drinks. The larger part is that I was married for 5 years without producing a child. Some consider that unfortunate. Samuel's brow furrowed. People can be cruel about matters that aren't their concern. Yes, they can, Ruth agreed softly. Timothy approached her chair, empty glass in hand. Thank you for the lemonade, Miss Taylor. It was very good. Ruth took the glass, genuinely touched by the child's manners. You're welcome, Timothy. Would you like more? He nodded eagerly, and she refilled his glass. Thomas quickly brought his over as well. Now, I believe you mentioned some mending, Ruth asked, turning back to Samuel. Yes. He unwrapped the brown paper package, revealing several shirts in varying states of disrepair. Boys are hard on clothes, as you can see. Ruth examined the garments with a professional eye. These won't take long to fix. When do you need them by? No particular rush. Samuel watched her inspect the tears and missing buttons. What do I owe you? Ruth named a modest sum, and Samuel nodded. That's fair. I appreciate it, Miss Taylor. As they prepared to leave, the twins lingered by the bookshelf, eyeing a volume with colorful binding. Do you like stories? Ruth asked them. They nodded in unison. That one has pictures, she said, indicating the book they were examining. Samuel looked slightly embarrassed. I'm afraid I don't read to them as often as I should. Long days training horses, and by evening. He trailed off. Perhaps they could come by sometime and I could read to them. The offer slipped out before Ruth had fully considered it. If that wouldn't be imposing, of course. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. That's mighty kind of you. They'd enjoy that, I expect. Papa, can we? Thomas asked, excitement brightening his eyes. We'll see, Samuel replied, placing his hat back on his head. Thank you for the lemonade, Miss Taylor. As Ruth closed the door behind them, she felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. The house seemed emptier than usual after their departure, the silence more pronounced. She returned to her mending with renewed purpose, examining Samuel Owens' shirts with care. They were of good quality but had clearly been mended before, somewhat clumsily large, uneven stitches that spoke of haste and necessity rather than skill. A man doing his best to care for his children alone, just as she was doing her best to build a life alone. The following week brought another knock at Ruth's door, this time earlier in the day. She opened it to find Samuel Owens alone, hat in hand as before. Mr. Owens, she greeted, suddenly conscious of the flour dusting her apron. I've finished your mending. That's good news, but not why I'm here, he said. I'm afraid I have a situation, Miss Taylor, and I was hoping you might be willing to help. Ruth opened the door wider. Please come in. What's happened? Samuel stepped inside, twisting his hat in his hands. Mrs. Caldwell, who's been watching the boys while I work, has taken ill. Her daughters come from Santa Fe to care for her, and I find myself without anyone to mind Timothy and Thomas during the day. I see, Ruth said carefully. I wouldn't ask, but I've got 3 new horses to train for the stage company, and they can't wait. His gray eyes met hers directly. The boys spoke highly of you after our visit. I'd pay you fairly for your time, of course. Ruth hesitated only briefly. I'd be happy to watch them, Mr. Owens. My mending can be done while keeping an eye on children. Relief washed over his features. "That's mighty kind of you. I'll bring them by tomorrow morning if that suits. I'll pick them up before sundown." "That would be fine," Ruth said, finding herself looking forward to the company. "Do they have any particular likes or dislikes I should know about?" Samuel's mouth curved into a rare smile. "They'll eat most anything except lima beans. Timothy's afraid of spiders and Thomas collects interesting rocks." He paused. "They're good boys, Miss Taylor, energetic but well-mannered for their age." "I'm sure we'll get along splendidly," Ruth assured him. As promised, Samuel arrived early the next morning with the twins in tow. Both boys carried small cloth sacks that presumably contained their treasures for the day. "I've packed their lunch," Samuel explained, handing Ruth a larger sack. "And there's a change of clothes in case they get into mischief, which is likely." "We'll be just fine," Ruth said confidently, though in truth, she felt a flutter of nervousness. She had cared for neighbors' children occasionally back east, but never for a full day and never since coming west. The twins looked up at her expectantly, their identical faces serious as they awaited instructions. "I thought perhaps we might bake cookies this morning," Ruth suggested. "And then you could help me in my little garden. Would you like that?" Their faces broke into matching grins, and Ruth felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth she'd nearly forgotten. "Be good for Miss Taylor," Samuel instructed firmly. "Mind your manners and do as she asks." "Yes, Papa," they chorused. As Samuel turned to leave, Ruth caught a glimpse of worry crossing his face. "They'll be safe with me," she assured him quietly. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "I know they will. Thank you, Miss Taylor." The day passed in a blur of activity. The boys proved to be enthusiastic if messy bakers, covering themselves and Ruth's kitchen in flour as they helped roll out cookie dough. They listened attentively as she read from her illustrated book, asking thoughtful questions about the story. In her small garden, they helped pull weeds, solemnly presenting her with every worm they discovered as if offering treasure. By afternoon, Ruth found herself genuinely enjoying their company. Their innocent questions and observations made her laugh more than she had in years. When Thomas asked why she lived alone and Timothy quickly admonished him that Papa says it's not polite to ask such things, Ruth gently explained that her husband had died. "Like our mama?" Thomas asked, his small face serious. "Yes," Ruth replied softly. "Like your mama." Timothy considered this. "Papa says Mama watches over us from heaven. Does your husband watch over you too?" The question caught Ruth off guard, bringing a lump to her throat. "I believe he does," she managed, though she wondered sometimes if Thomas had found peace, or if he had carried his disappointment with him to the grave. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Samuel returned. Ruth watched from the porch as the twins ran to greet him, chattering excitedly about their day. Samuel listened attentively, crouching to their level as they described the cookies they had baked and the worms they had rescued. "Sounds like you had quite an adventure," he said, standing and approaching the porch. "I hope they weren't too much trouble, Miss Taylor." "Not at all," Ruth replied honestly. "They're delightful children." Something in Samuel's expression softened as he looked at her. "I'm grateful for your help. Would it be too much to ask if you could watch them again tomorrow?" "I'd be happy to," Ruth said, finding she meant it completely. The arrangement continued for 2 weeks. Each morning, Samuel would bring the boys to Ruth's house, and each evening he would return to find them happily engaged in some activity, learning simple stitches, listening to stories, or helping Ruth prepare dinner. The twins flourished under her attention, and Ruth found herself looking forward to their arrival each day. On the Sunday between, Ruth noticed the whispers at church had changed in tone. Instead of pitying glances, she received curious looks from the women of Glenrio, particularly when Samuel and the twins sat beside her in the pew, an act that raised more than a few eyebrows. "You've been spending considerable time with the Owens boys, Mrs. Peterson commented afterward, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes sharp with interest. "Mr. Owens needed someone to watch his children while he works," Ruth explained. "It's a temporary arrangement." "How providential for him to find someone willing, Mrs. Peterson replied, her emphasis making clear what she left unsaid, that a childless woman might find particular satisfaction in caring for someone else's offspring. Ruth lifted her chin slightly. "The boys are a joy to look after." "I'm sure they are, Mrs. Peterson agreed, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Although one wonders what they truly need is a mother, not merely a caretaker." The words stung as they were intended to. Ruth excused herself, making her way toward the church door where Samuel stood waiting with the twins, who had insisted on showing Ruth a frog they'd discovered near the church steps. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked, noting her expression. "Just the usual pleasantries," Ruth replied, forcing a smile for the boys' benefit. Samuel's gaze drifted to where Mrs. Peterson stood with her group of friends, all watching with undisguised interest. "Small towns," he murmured, "always interested in everyone's business but their own." "Look, Miss Ruth," Timothy held up a squirming frog. "Can we keep him?" Ruth bent to examine the creature. "I think he'd be happier by the creek, don't you? But perhaps we could visit him tomorrow." Samuel watched the interaction, something unreadable in his expression. "Boys, why don't you put the frog back where you found him, and then we'll escort Miss Taylor home?" "That's not necessary," Ruth protested. "Maybe not necessary," Samuel agreed quietly, "but right." The walk to Ruth's house was pleasant, with the twins running ahead, stopping occasionally to examine interesting stones or plants. Samuel walked beside Ruth, matching his pace to hers. "I'm grateful for how you are with them," he said after a comfortable silence. "They've taken to you in a way I didn't expect. They're easy to care for," Ruth replied. "Smart, curious kind, you've raised them well." Samuel's expression turned pensive. "I've done my best, but there are things. A father isn't always enough." They reached Ruth's gate and Samuel stopped, watching as the twins explored the small front garden. "Miss Taylor, Ruth," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "would you join us for dinner tonight at our place? The boys have been asking and He paused. "I'd appreciate the company." The invitation caught Ruth by surprise. "I'd be delighted," she answered truthfully. Samuel's smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. "Good, that's good. I'm no great cook, mind you, but I can manage a decent stew." "I could bring dessert," Ruth offered. "We still have cookies from yesterday. The boys would like that." He hesitated again. "I'll come fetch you around 5 if that suits." "It does," Ruth replied, feeling a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with cookies or stew. After Samuel and the twins departed, Ruth spent more time than necessary selecting a dress for the evening, finally choosing her blue calico with the mother-of-pearl buttons. She brushed her dark hair until it shone, pinning it back more carefully than usual, and added a touch of rose water behind her ears, a luxury she rarely indulged in. When Samuel arrived to escort her, he had clearly made his own efforts. His usual work clothes had been replaced with a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. He offered Ruth his arm for the short wagon ride to his property, a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. The old McCreary place had been transformed in the 2 months since Samuel purchased it. The house itself was a simple but solid structure of weathered boards with a broad porch and sturdy chimney. New fencing enclosed a corral where several fine horses grazed, and a vegetable garden showed signs of recent care. Inside, the house was modestly furnished but clean, with signs of the boys everywhere, small boots by the door, wooden toys on a shelf, drawings pinned to the wall. The twins greeted Ruth enthusiastically, eager to show her their room and treasures. Dinner was indeed simple, a hearty stew with fresh bread, but Ruth couldn't remember when she'd last enjoyed a meal more. The conversation flowed easily, the boys contributing stories and questions, Samuel revealing a dry humor she hadn't fully appreciated before. As the twins grew sleepy, Samuel excused himself to put them to bed. Ruth listened to the muffled sounds of a bedtime story and childish prayers, feeling a bittersweet ache in her chest. When Samuel returned to the main room, he seemed momentarily hesitant, as if unsure how to proceed without the children as buffers. "Would you like coffee?" he offered. "Or I have a bit of whiskey if you prefer." "Coffee would be lovely," Ruth replied, rising to help. They worked together companionably, Samuel building up the fire while Ruth prepared the coffee pot. When they finally sat across from each other at the table, mugs between them, a comfortable silence settled. "May I ask you something personal, Ruth?" Samuel said finally, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. Ruth nodded, though apprehension tightened her throat. "The town's attitude toward you, it's because you never had children with your husband." The directness of the question should have shocked her, but somehow, from Samuel, it felt honest rather than prying. "Yes," she admitted. "Thomas and I tried for 5 years. When it became clear I couldn't bear children, she hesitated. He was disappointed. We both were, but differently. And the town took his side." Ruth traced the rim of her mug. "Thomas was well liked. His family had been here since the town was founded. When he died in that mining accident, I think many felt I'd failed him somehow, that if he'd had a son, his legacy would continue." Samuel's jaw tightened. "That's a damned unfair burden to place on any woman." "Perhaps," Ruth acknowledged, "but children are important out here. Families need them to work the land, continue the bloodline." She gave a small, sad smile. "A barren woman is seen as incomplete. Is that how you see yourself?" Samuel's gaze was searching without judgment. The question struck deeper than Ruth expected. "For a long time, yes," she admitted. "It's why I stayed in Glenrio after Thomas died, even with the whispers. I didn't believe I deserved better." "And now," Samuel pressed gently, Ruth thought of the past 2 weeks with the twins, their laughter, their questions, their small hands in hers. "Now I'm not so sure," she whispered. Samuel reached across the table, his weathered hand covering hers. "For what it's worth, those boys think the world of you. Timothy asked me yesterday if you could be their new mama." Ruth's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "I said that was a complicated question," Samuel replied, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern across her knuckles. "But I also said you were a special lady who cares for them very much." "I do," Ruth acknowledged, her voice barely audible. "More than I thought possible." Samuel withdrew his hand slowly. "It's getting late. I should take you home before the gossips have more to talk about." The ride back to Ruth's house was quiet, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for dinner," Ruth said, suddenly shy, "and for your company." "The pleasure was mine," Samuel replied. He hesitated, then added, "The stage company is satisfied with the horses. My regular work will resume next week." "I see," Ruth said, understanding the implication he would no longer need her to watch the boys daily. A surprising disappointment settled in her chest. "But," Samuel continued, "the boys would be heartbroken if they didn't see you regularly. Perhaps you might join us for Sunday dinners, and other times as you're able." The invitation warmed her. "I'd like that very much." Samuel's smile was slow and genuine. "Good night, Ruth Taylor." "Good night, Samuel Owens." As Ruth watched him drive away, she realized her house no longer felt like the sanctuary it once had. Instead, it seemed empty in a way it never had before, not just quiet, but lacking something essential she hadn't known she was missing. The next morning, Ruth was hanging laundry in her back garden when she heard raised voices from the direction of Main Street. Curious, she made her way around her house to see what was causing the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, and at its center stood Samuel, his face rigid with anger, facing off against a large man Ruth recognized as Bill Harker, a local rancher with a reputation for meanness when drunk. "Take it back," Samuel was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. Harker sneered. "Why should I? Everyone knows it's true. Taylor woman's cursed, can't have children. What kind of man starts sniffing around a barren woman?" Ruth froze, mortification and hurt washing over her in equal measure. The crowd's attention was so focused on the confrontation that no one noticed her at first. "I won't say it again," Samuel warned, his hands flexing at his sides. "Apologize for speaking ill of Miss Taylor or face the consequences." Harker laughed, the sound ugly and slurred. "Or what? You'll defend her honor. Why? Because she watches your brats. Or is she warming your bed too?" The rest of his words were cut off as Samuel's fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Harker recovered quickly, charging at Samuel with a roar. The two men grappled, exchanging blows as the crowd backed away. Sheriff Jenkins pushed his way through, shouting for order. "Break it up, now." The men separated, both breathing hard. Harker spat blood onto the dirt. "He attacked me, Sheriff." "After you insulted a lady," Samuel countered, a cut above his eye beginning to bleed. "Is that true, Bill?" the sheriff asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Before Harker could respond, a woman's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "It is." All eyes turned to Mrs. Peterson, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Bill Harker said inappropriate things about Miss Taylor. Mr. Owens asked him to apologize. When he refused and said something even worse, Mr. Owens struck him. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Bill, you've been warned about your mouth when you drink. Go home and sober up. Mr. Owens, while I understand your motivation, fighting in the street isn't acceptable either." It was then that Ruth stepped forward, her face pale but composed. "Sheriff Jenkins, the fault is mine. If my reputation wasn't a subject of gossip, this wouldn't have happened." The crowd parted as she approached, expressions ranging from embarrassment to curiosity to grudging respect. Samuel's eyes widened when he saw her. "Ruth, you shouldn't." "I should," she interrupted gently. "Mr. Harker, I'm sorry if my presence in this town offends you. I assure you, my inability to bear children has caused me more pain than it ever could you." A hush fell over the gathering. Even Harker looked somewhat abashed, though it might have been the throbbing jaw rather than genuine remorse. Sheriff Jenkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. "All right, folks, show's over. Go about your business." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Samuel approached Ruth, concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't have had to hear that." "It's nothing I haven't heard before," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. Samuel's expression darkened. "It shouldn't be something you hear at all." Mrs. Peterson, surprisingly, lingered nearby. After a moment's hesitation, she approached them. "Miss Taylor, that is." She seemed to struggle with her words. What Harker said was cruel and unfair. Not all of us think that way. Ruth was too stunned to respond immediately. After years of subtle snubs and barely concealed judgment, Mrs. Peterson's acknowledgement felt like a shift in the earth beneath her feet. "Thank you," she managed finally. Mrs. Peterson nodded once, glanced at Samuel, then hurried away, apparently having exhausted her capacity for reconciliation. "You should have someone look at that cut," Ruth said to Samuel, changing the subject. Samuel touched his eyebrow, seeming surprised to find blood on his fingers. "It's nothing, nevertheless." Ruth straightened her shoulders. "Come to my house. I have supplies to clean it properly." He followed her without argument, though his silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Inside her home, Ruth busied herself gathering clean cloths and a basin of water, grateful for the familiar task to steady her hands. "Sit," she instructed, indicating a chair at her kitchen table. Samuel complied, watching her as she dampened a cloth. When she stepped closer to clean the cut, he caught her wrist gently. "I'm sorry," he said, his gray eyes searching her face, "for defending me. Don't be. For the fact that you needed defending at all." His thumb brushed across her pulse point. "This town doesn't deserve you, Ruth Taylor." The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, undid her carefully maintained composure. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to turn away. Samuel rose, still holding her wrist, and gently drew her closer. "Don't be," he echoed her words back to her. Then, with a tenderness that made her breath catch, he brushed a tear from her cheek. "Ruth, I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how warm his hand felt against her skin. "The boys and I will be leaving Glenrio." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Leaving? But why?" "Your business is going well, the boys are settled." "I won't stay in a town that treats you this way," Samuel said firmly. "I've been offered work in Santa Fe. We could have a fresh start there." "But this is your home now," Ruth protested. "A home should be more than just a place," Samuel replied. "It should be where you're respected, where people care for one another." His expression softened. "Where you feel like you belong." Ruth's thoughts whirled. The prospect of Samuel and the twins leaving created a hollow feeling she wasn't prepared for. In just a few short weeks, they had become central to her world in a way she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "When?" she asked, her voice small. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. His hand moved from her wrist to cup her face. "Ruth, come with us." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Come to Santa Fe," Samuel repeated. "The boys need you." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I need you too." "Samuel, Ruth's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're kind and patient and stronger than anyone gives you credit for. I know my boys light up when they see you. I know that when I'm with you, I feel like the man I want to be rather than the man I've had to be." Ruth's throat tightened with emotion. "What are you saying, Samuel?" His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I'm saying the boys need a mother, and I'm asking if you might consider being my wife." The world seemed to still around them, the only sound Ruth's unsteady breathing and the distant calls of birds outside. "This is very sudden," she managed finally. Samuel nodded, a hint of vulnerability crossing his features. "I know it is, and I'm not asking for an immediate answer, just think about it. Think about what we could build together, away from the shadows of the past." Before Ruth could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. Samuel stepped back and Ruth smoothed her skirts, trying to compose herself before answering. Sheriff Jenkins stood on her porch, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Taylor, Mr. Owens. Sorry to disturb you, but there's been an incident at Mr. Owens' property." Samuel was immediately alert. "What kind of incident?" "The boys are with Mrs. Caldwell." "The boys are fine," the sheriff assured him quickly. "But it seems someone took exception to our earlier confrontation. Your corral fence has been cut in 3 places, and 2 of your horses are missing." Samuel's expression hardened. "Harker." "Can't prove that yet," Jenkins replied, though his tone suggested he had his suspicions. But you'd best come see to your stock before more scatter. Samuel turned to Ruth, conflict evident in his eyes. Ruth, I go, she urged. We can talk later, your horses need you now. He hesitated only a moment before nodding. I'll come back when I can. After they left, Ruth sat heavily in the chair Samuel had vacated, her thoughts in turmoil. A proposal of marriage from a man she'd known barely a month. It was impulsive, perhaps even reckless. And yet, the thought of Samuel and the twins leaving without her created a pain so acute it took her breath away. In their brief time together, they had awakened something she thought had died with Thomas' hope. Hope for a different kind of future than the lonely existence she'd resigned herself to. But marriage, based on such a short acquaintance, what did Samuel truly feel for her? Affection, gratitude, pity? And what did she feel for him? Ruth moved to her window, watching the street outside as if it might provide answers. The town of Glenrio had been her home for 6 years, yet she had never truly belonged. Each day had been an exercise in endurance rather than living. The prospect of leaving brought not fear but a surprising sense of liberation. As for Samuel himself, Ruth closed her eyes, conjuring his image. His quiet strength, his devotion to his children, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. The tenderness in his touch when he wiped away her tears. Was that enough to build a marriage upon? Thomas had courted her properly for a year before proposing. Their marriage had been comfortable, if not passionate, until the lack of children created a barrier between them that widened with each passing month. By the end, they had been living separate lives under one roof, the weight of unmet expectations crushing what affection had once existed. Would it be different with Samuel? He knew from the beginning she couldn't bear children, yet he had offered marriage anyway. The twins already filled the need for heirs, for the continuation of family that had been so important to Thomas. Ruth was still deep in thought when another knock came at her door hours later. This time, it was Timothy and Thomas, accompanied by Mrs. Caldwell, their faces streaked with tears. "I'm sorry to trouble you, Miss Taylor," Mrs. Caldwell said, looking harried. "The boys insisted on seeing you. They're quite upset. Papa said we have to leave," Timothy blurted before Ruth could respond. "We don't want to go, we want to stay with you," Thomas added, his lower lip trembling. Ruth knelt to their level, her heart twisting at their distress. "Come inside, boys, Mrs. Caldwell, would you like to join us?" The older woman shook her head. "I should return to my daughter. The boys said they'd calm down if they could see you, and Mr. Owens is busy with the sheriff and the missing horses." After Mrs. Caldwell departed, Ruth settled the twins at her kitchen table with milk and the last of the cookies they had baked together. "Now," she said gently, "tell me what's troubling you." "Papa said we're moving to Santa Fe," Timothy explained, his freckled face serious. "But we like it here. We like our house and the horses and Mrs. Caldwell. And we like you most of all," Thomas added earnestly. "If we go away, we won't see you any more." Ruth's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm very fond of you both too," she managed. "Then why can't you come with us?" Timothy asked, the question so direct and innocent that Ruth was momentarily speechless. "It's not that simple," she began, then paused, wondering why it couldn't be that simple after all. "Your father has asked me to think about it, actually." Both boys' faces lit up with hope. "Really?" Thomas asked. "You could be our new mama." The question, so similar to the one Samuel had conveyed from Timothy earlier, struck Ruth with new force. These children, who had lost their mother so young they could barely remember her, saw in Ruth what the rest of the town refused to see: not a barren woman, but someone capable of motherhood nonetheless. "Would you like that?" she asked carefully. "If I came with you and your papa to Santa Fe?" "Yes," they chorused without hesitation. But, Ruth continued, it would be a very big change for all of us, and your papa and I would need to be very sure before making such a decision. The twins exchanged a look, seeming to communicate silently as only twins can. Papa likes you, Timothy said confidently. He smiles more when you're around. And he put on his good shirt when he took you to dinner, Thomas added, with the keen observation of a child who misses nothing. The one he only wears to church. Ruth couldn't help but smile at their reasoning. Those are important things to notice, she acknowledged. But adults need to think about many things before deciding to get married. Like what? Timothy asked, genuinely curious. Ruth considered how to explain complex adult emotions to 4-year-olds. Well, we need to be sure we care for each other deeply, in a special way that's different from other kinds of caring. We need to be sure we can build a good life together, one that would make all of us happy. But you already care for us, Thomas pointed out with a child's logic. And we're happy when we're with you, Papa too. The simple truth of his statement resonated with Ruth. Perhaps she was overthinking what was, at its heart, not so complicated after all. Did she care for Samuel and the twins? Unquestionably. Did they bring her joy? More than she'd experienced in years. Could she envision a future with them? Increasingly, she couldn't imagine one without them. You're very wise for your age, she told the boys with a smile. Now finish your milk, and then I'll take you back to Mrs. Caldwell. I need to speak with your father. By the time Ruth walked the twins back to Mrs. Caldwell's house, her mind was clearer than it had been all day. The decision that had seemed so overwhelming hours earlier now felt right, almost inevitable. There would be challenges, certainly a new town, a new role as wife and mother, the complexities of building a marriage with a man she was still coming to know. But for the first time in years, Ruth felt hope rather than resignation when she contemplated her future. She was returning home when she spotted Samuel riding toward town, his expression grim. He dismounted when he saw her, leading his horse the remaining distance. "Did you find the horses?" she asked. "One of them," he replied. "Tracks suggest the other was taken across the county line. Sheriff's going to keep looking, but—" He shrugged, resignation in the gesture. "Harker denies everything, of course, claims he was too drunk to have done it himself, and no one will testify to seeing him near my property." "I'm sorry, Samuel," he shook his head. "It's just a horse." Valuable but replaceable. His gaze searched her face. "The boys, they came to see me," Ruth explained. "They're upset about leaving Glenrio." Samuel sighed heavily. "I'm not handling this well. I should have prepared them better, explained more clearly." "They're young," Ruth said gently. Change is frightening at any age, but especially for children who have already experienced so much loss. "I know." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Ruth had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "But after what happened today, I won't stay in a town where my family isn't respected." The words "my family" sent a warm current through Ruth's body. Did he already think of her that way as part of his family? "Samuel," she said softly, gathering her courage. "About what you asked me earlier." His expression stilled, vulnerability replacing the anger that had tightened his features. "You don't need to answer now, Ruth. I know it was sudden, perhaps even presumptuous." "Yes," she interrupted. Samuel stopped, uncertain. "Yes, it was presumptuous." "Yes, I'll marry you," Ruth clarified, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I'll come to Santa Fe. Yes, I want to be a mother to Timothy and Thomas." For a moment, Samuel seemed unable to process her words. Then, with a swiftness that took Ruth's breath away, he closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to feel pressured or—" "I'm certain," Ruth assured him. "The boys helped me see things more clearly." Life is uncertain, Samuel. We can't know what the future holds. But I know I care deeply for you and the twins, and I believe we can build something good together. Samuel's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry that had marked it earlier. With gentle reverence, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Ruth Taylor," he murmured, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known." Then, with the thoroughness of a man who had thought about the moment for some time, he kissed her. Ruth responded with a passion that surprised them both, her hands coming to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "The boys will be overjoyed," he said. "They've already decided you should be their mother." "They mentioned that," Ruth replied with a small laugh. "They're very persuasive advocates." "That they are," Samuel agreed, his eyes warm with affection. "When should we tell them?" "Tonight," Ruth suggested. "Together. And then perhaps we can discuss when the wedding might take place." Samuel nodded, then hesitated. "Ruth, there's something I should tell you, something I haven't been entirely forthright about." A flicker of apprehension passed through her. "What is it?" "The job offer in Santa Fe." "It's real, but it wasn't the only reason I considered leaving Glenrio." He took her hands in his. "The truth is, I've been watching you since we arrived. Not in a strange way," he added hastily. "But I noticed how you carried yourself with dignity despite the town's treatment. How kind you were to everyone, even those who didn't deserve it. And then when I saw you with the boys that first day in Donovan's store." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Sarah's death left a hole in our lives that I thought could never be filled. The boys were too young to truly understand, but I saw what they were missing every day: a mother's love, a woman's guidance. I tried my best, but—" "You've done wonderfully with them," Ruth assured him. Samuel squeezed her hands gratefully. "When I saw how they responded to you, how naturally you interacted with them, something shifted inside me. It was like finding a piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized was missing. The job in Santa Fe gave me a reason to ask you to come with us. But the truth is, Ruth, I've been falling in love with you since that first day." The confession, spoken with such honest emotion, brought tears to Ruth's eyes. "Oh, Samuel, I wanted you to know the truth before we move forward," he said earnestly. "My feelings for you aren't because you're good with the boys, though you are. They're not because I need a mother for my children, though I do. I want you to be my wife because I love the woman you are, your strength, your kindness, your quiet dignity. The way you see the best in others, even when they don't deserve it." Ruth reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I think I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "With your integrity, your devotion to your children, the way you defend what matters to you. It happened so gradually I hardly noticed until today, when the thought of you leaving without me felt unbearable." Samuel turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Then it seems we're in agreement," he said, his voice low and tender. "It seems we are," Ruth replied, feeling a happiness she had almost forgotten was possible. The news of Ruth Taylor's engagement to Samuel Owens spread through Glenrio with the speed only a small town's gossip network can achieve. Reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine happiness for Ruth, while others maintained that Samuel must be marrying her out of pity or convenience. But for the first time in years, Ruth found herself immune to the whispers and speculation. The wedding was planned for the following week, a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a small gathering at Samuel's house. Ruth spent the days leading up to it in a flurry of activity, packing her belongings for the move to Santa Fe and altering her mother's wedding dress to fit her slimmer frame. Mrs. Peterson, continuing her surprising turn toward reconciliation, offered to host a small gathering for the women of the town to wish Ruth well. Though skeptical of the sudden change of heart, Ruth accepted the invitation, only to be genuinely touched when several women presented her with gifts and sincere good wishes. "I misjudged you," Mrs. Peterson admitted quietly as the gathering was ending. "Many of us did. It's easy to form opinions based on incomplete understanding." "Thank you for saying that," Ruth replied, accepting the olive branch for what it was. On the morning of the wedding, Ruth stood in her small house for the last time, looking around at the bare walls and empty shelves. This place had been her sanctuary and her prison, a refuge from judgment, but also a constant reminder of her isolation. Leaving it felt like closing a chapter of her life that had been defined by loss and loneliness. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Caldwell, who had offered to help Ruth prepare for the ceremony. "My goodness, look at you," the older woman exclaimed when Ruth emerged from the bedroom in her wedding dress. "Samuel Owens is a fortunate man indeed." Ruth smoothed the ivory satin of her mother's dress, now updated with delicate lace at the cuffs and neckline. "I'm the fortunate one," she replied. "I never expected to find love again, especially not with such a good man and his wonderful children." Mrs. Caldwell patted her hand. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, my dear. Now, let's get your hair pinned properly. We can't keep your groom waiting." The church was fuller than Ruth had anticipated, with nearly half the town in attendance. As she walked down the aisle alone, having no father or brother to give her away, Ruth kept her eyes fixed on Samuel, who stood at the altar with the twins beside him, all three dressed in their Sunday best. The love in Samuel's eyes as he watched her approach gave Ruth the courage to hold her head high, despite the mixture of supportive and skeptical gazes that followed her progress. By the time she reached him and placed her hand in his, the rest of the world had fallen away, leaving only the four of them in this moment of beginning. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Clark speaking eloquently about the foundations of a strong marriage: respect, partnership, and abiding love. When it came time for the vows, Samuel surprised Ruth by adding his own words to the traditional promises. "Ruth," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I vow not only to love and cherish you, but to honor the remarkable woman you are, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, to defend your dignity as fiercely as you have defended others, and to build with you a home where respect and love are the foundations of our family." When it was Ruth's turn, she spoke from her heart, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Samuel, I promise to be not only your wife but a true partner in all things, to love you faithfully through whatever challenges we may face, to mother your children as if they were born of my own body, and to help create a home where all of us can grow and thrive together." The twins, standing solemnly beside their father, beamed with pride when Reverend Clark pronounced Ruth and Samuel husband and wife. After Samuel kissed his bride somewhat more thoroughly than was strictly proper in church, Timothy and Thomas rushed forward to embrace them both, creating a family circle that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the congregation. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with neighbors contributing dishes and music. Even Bill Harker made an appearance, offering a gruff but seemingly sincere apology to both Samuel and Ruth before departing early. Sheriff Jenkins returned the missing horse, which had been found abandoned near the county line, presenting it as a wedding gift of sorts. As the afternoon progressed, Ruth found herself sitting on the porch steps, watching Samuel spin a laughing Thomas in a circle while Timothy waited impatiently for his turn. The sight filled her heart with such profound happiness that it almost hurt a sweet ache of fulfillment she had never expected to experience, Mrs. Peterson approached, carrying 2 cups of punch. "You look happy," she observed, offering one to Ruth. "I am," Ruth replied simply, accepting the drink. "Happier than I thought possible." The older woman nodded, her gaze following Ruth's to where Samuel now had both boys hoisted onto his shoulders. "They're lucky to have found you," she said. "And perhaps Glenrio is poorer for losing you." The admission, coming from one who had been among the most judgmental, caught Ruth by surprise. "Thank you for saying that," she said after a moment. "But Santa Fe offers us a fresh start, away from painful memories." "I understand," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Just know that should you ever wish to visit, you'll find a warmer welcome than before." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Samuel found Ruth sitting with the twins, who had finally exhausted themselves and fallen asleep against her sides. He gazed at the tableau with naked affection. "Mrs. Owens," he said quietly, the name still new and wonderful on his lips, "are you ready to go home?" Home. The word held such promise now, not just a place, but people who loved her, a purpose beyond mere survival. "Yes," Ruth replied, smiling up at her husband. "I'm ready." They left for Santa Fe the following morning, their wagon loaded with Ruth's possessions and the gifts from well-wishers. The twins, excited for the adventure ahead, chattered happily from the back of the wagon, pointing out interesting sights and asking endless questions about their new home. As they crested the rise that would take Glenrio out of view, Ruth turned for one last look at the town that had been both her prison and her salvation. For all its flaws and the pain she had experienced there, it had led her to Samuel and the boys, to this new beginning that seemed full of possibility. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked softly, noting her backward glance. Ruth shook her head, reaching for his hand. "Not one," she replied with conviction. "Everything that happened led us here to each other. I wouldn't change a moment of it." Samuel squeezed her hand, his gray eyes warm with promise. "Neither would I, my love. Neither would I." The journey to Santa Fe took several days, during which Ruth discovered new aspects of family life, cooking over campfires, telling stories under the stars, soothing nightmares, and witnessing the boundless energy of young boys exploring new surroundings. By the time they arrived at their destination, she felt as though she had always been part of this family unit, her place among them natural and right. Santa Fe proved to be everything Samuel had described: a vibrant, growing city with a blend of cultures and opportunities. The house he had arranged for them was modest but well constructed, with enough land for the horses and a garden Ruth immediately began planning in her mind. Their neighbors welcomed them without preconception or judgment, seeing only a devoted father, his new wife, and their twin boys. For the first time in years, Ruth was defined not by what she lacked, but by what she offered: her skills as a seamstress, her kindness to others, her obvious affection for her new family. The transition wasn't without challenges. The twins tested boundaries, as children do when adjusting to change. Samuel sometimes worked long hours training horses for wealthy ranch owners. Ruth occasionally found herself overwhelmed by the sudden shift from solitary existence to constant companionship and responsibility. But each challenge was met together, with the understanding that they were building something precious: a family founded on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than expectation. 6 months after their arrival in Santa Fe, Ruth sat on their porch swing, watching Samuel teach the boys to groom a new pony he had brought home, their birthday gift, though the celebration was still 2 weeks away. The sight of their small hands carefully brushing the pony's coat under Samuel's patient guidance filled her with a contentment so deep it seemed to have no bottom. When Samuel looked up and caught her watching, his smile was intimate, and knowing the smile of a man who had found his place in the world, with the woman he loved. That night, after the boys were asleep, Samuel and Ruth sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "I had a letter from Mrs. Caldwell today," Ruth told him. "She says Glenrio is changing, a new school teacher has arrived, and there's talk of a proper doctor setting up practice." "Good changes," Samuel commented, his fingers idly stroking her arm, "though I can't say I miss the place much." "Nor I," Ruth admitted. "Santa Fe feels more like home than Glenrio ever did." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "That's because home isn't just a place, my love. It's where we build our life together." Ruth tilted her face up to his. "And we've built a good one, haven't we?" "The best," Samuel agreed, bending to kiss her properly. "Though I think we're still building. There's plenty of room for more if life sees fit to bless us." Though they had never explicitly discussed it, Ruth understood his meaning. While the possibility of conception seemed remote given her history, they had certainly given nature ample opportunity to work a miracle in the months since their wedding. Ruth had made peace with her condition long ago, finding fulfillment in mothering the twins. Yet Samuel's words, free from expectation or pressure, warmed her heart nonetheless. "Whatever comes," she replied, "we already have more than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "As do I, Ruth, as do I." 3 years later, on a bright spring morning, Ruth sat in the garden of their Santa Fe home, watching as Timothy and Thomas, now 7, and bursting with energy, chased each other around the yard. Beside her, in a small cradle, lay their newest family member, Elizabeth Sarah Owens, 4 months old, and the living embodiment of what doctors had once declared impossible. The pregnancy had come as a shock to both Ruth and Samuel, discovered only after Ruth had fallen ill with what she initially believed was a lingering stomach ailment. The town's doctor had examined her with growing amazement, finally delivering the news that had left both of them speechless with joy and disbelief. The twins had received the news of a new sibling with typical 7-year-old reactions: initial suspicion, followed by protective enthusiasm. Now, they were devoted big brothers, competing for Elizabeth's smiles and proudly telling anyone who would listen about their baby sister. Samuel emerged from the house, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies. The years had added a few silver strands to his dark hair, but otherwise he remained as strong and vital as the day Ruth had first met him. His eyes, however, held a peace she hadn't seen before, the contentment of a man whose life had exceeded his hopes. "The most beautiful sight in all of New Mexico," he declared, setting down the tray and bending to kiss first Ruth, then the sleeping Elizabeth. "Which one of us?" Ruth teased, taking the glass he offered. "All of you," Samuel replied without hesitation. "My family." The word still held magic for Ruth, even after 3 years of marriage. Family, once a concept that had brought pain and inadequacy, now the center of a life richer than she had dared to imagine. The twins, growing tall and strong under their loving guidance. Elizabeth, the miracle neither had expected. And Samuel, whose love had never wavered, whose partnership had proven as steady and true as he himself. "Penny for your thoughts," Samuel said, settling beside her. Ruth smiled, watching as Timothy and Thomas abandoned their game to come running for cookies. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are," she replied. "How one moment can change everything." Samuel nodded, understanding immediately. "The day I walked into Donovan's store with 2 rowdy boys and too much mending, and said they needed a mother," Ruth finished, the memory still vivid after all this time. "Best words I ever spoke," Samuel declared, his arm slipping around her shoulders as the twins arrived, breathless and laughing, ready for refreshments and stories and all the ordinary joys that made up their extraordinary life together. And as Ruth looked at the faces of her family, the husband who had seen her worth when others didn't, the boys who had accepted her love without question, the daughter whose existence defied all medical prediction, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she was meant for. Not just to be a mother or a wife, but to be this woman in this family, creating together the happiness that had once seemed forever beyond her reach. In the distance, the mountains that surrounded Santa Fe caught the midday sun, their peaks glowing like promises kept. Ruth leaned against Samuel's shoulder, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully beside them, the twins chattering excitedly about their plans to build a fort. This, she thought with profound gratitude, was what it meant to be truly home, not defined by what was missing, but by the abundance of love that had found her when she least expected it.